Clearly, we're still talking about the budget a few days on, not least because of the market reaction yesterday as market participants digested it all. The 10-year UK gilt yield hit 4.5%. How closely are you watching the gilt market at the moment? Are there some nerves?
Well, look, markets always respond to budgets in the normal way. There's a lot of new information about the economy and the nation's finances presented to Parliament, and it's normal for markets to respond. The key point is that the first line of the Labour Party manifesto was about bringing fiscal and economic stability back to Britain. We've done that with this budget. We've got strong rules on day-to-day spending, our stability rule, which means that for the first time since Labour was last in government, day-to-day spending will be paid for by tax receipts, not by borrowing money each and every month to pay the bills as the Conservatives did. And our investment rule will mean that debt as a share of the economy is falling. And that's why actually there's a fiscal consolidation over the next few years. We've inherited an economy where debt is around 4% of the size of the economy. It's coming down to just about 2%.
Well, I mean, you can talk about sort of long-term stability in your plans, but actually gilt markets have not been stable over the last couple of days, the last couple of months. They've risen from 4 to 4.5% in just 2 weeks. We could go back to the middle of September when they were lower. Still, some of that is global bond yields rising, but the last week it has been specific to the UK, yesterday in particular. It's been orderly, not disorderly, but they're not stable. So I just guess I'm wondering whether you're watching that very closely and whether the reaction that we've seen is telling you we're pushing things to the limit as we stand.
Well, look, as I said, the markets will always respond to a budget, and there's been a change in an approach to the economy here. Under the Conservatives, you had 14 years of cuts to investment, on public investment, as well as cuts to private sector investment for a whole host of other reasons. This budget chose to invest in our country as opposed to continue down the path of decline, and markets respond to that because that means that we will be borrowing money to pay for things like schools and hospitals and transport infrastructure. But importantly, because of that tough investment rule, making sure that investment as the size of the economy is managed and is under control and falls as the size of the economy over the years ahead.
Again, come back to it one more time. I mean, are you watching it closely? If it continues to rise, if it did get more disorderly, would that be a very clear sign that the markets are telling you, in fact, this borrowing is a little bit too much?
I think we've all got PTSD from Liz Truss. And just let's compare the two different scenarios because they're very, very different. So under Liz Truss, as we saw, they sacked the permanent secretary, they ignored the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, they announced £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts and said they were only just getting started. And then the market went mad, and we all know what happened then. Completely different in contrast to now. We've got verified reports from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility that say we meet our fiscal rules earlier than had been planned originally, 2027, 2028, that those tough fiscal rules means there is a fiscal consolidation and a strong approach to public spending. We're in a very, very different world, but I understand why you asked the question, because everybody suffered as a consequence of the way the Conservatives mismanaged the economy.
I agree. In 2022, it was disorderly. This has been orderly, but it's nonetheless pushing up borrowing costs in a significant way as relates to normal moves in gilt yields. I guess, the other thing that happened in 2022 is after the budget, we heard comments from the then chancellor that he wasn't done yet. And I guess this is my question to you. Are you looking at the moves in the people that you'd need to borrow from to fund this investment and thinking we're pushing it to the limit as it stands? There's not going to be a spring statement or a budget next year that sees another big increase in borrowing, or is there more to come?
We think this is the right approach to borrowing and spending in the country in line with our tough fiscal rules. We do not think we're pushing it to the limit, but we are taking the country down a different path, which is investing once again in the country's infrastructure, which is because we've come to the diagnosis that the reason our economy has not been growing for so many years and dipping into recession, the reason our public services have not been performing well, is because the last government cut investment. That's why we're investing in Britain in line with those tough fiscal rules, and we think that's the right balance.
So that's the debt side of the bargain. A big picture question for you on the tax side of the bargain. The tax burden was already at a sort of a high since 1951, 38% of GDP. It's going to rise again, get closer to 40%. The US is at 30%. They're a lower tax, lower welfare economy. The EU average is 45%. They're a higher tax, higher welfare set of economies. Do you look at where we are now, and it's going to rise each of the 5 years you're in government, and think we've still got a bit of breathing room, we've still got 5% or so to go before we get less competitive than the EU? Or would you like to see it get back down again somewhere towards where the US levels are if you're in power for a decade?
Look, you're right. Compared to wealthy nations, we're kind of middle of the pack on tax as a science of the economy, and in comparison to many European similar countries, we're below where they are. But let's be clear, our promise is at this election and in this budget not to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT on working people, to keep the rate of corporation tax on business profits.
We've heard all of that all
no,
week.
but the answer to your question, because we are maintaining that for the whole of this parliament. We're not going to come back.
I know,
and
but that's
those.
on individual taxes. The overall tax burden is rising to a height not since records began. Where would you like to see it? Where would Darren Jones like to see it in 10 years' time if you're still in power? Is it okay to let it rise? Are you embracing big government, which might well work? More spending, you've said that public services need spending, but you'll need to fund it one way or another.
What you want is an economy that is growing so that you have profits helping drive investment in the country, profits from workers and their individual taxes and profits from businesses. What you want is public services that are more effective at delivering services for lower cost. So you definitely don't want in a 10-year period to see that tax burden keep going up and up and up. You don't want that. To be successful, and this is the big challenge this government has signed up to, is to get growth back into the economy and to get public services delivering more productively. This is a big budget for a whole host of reasons to meet the scale of the challenges that we've inherited. But the work now isn't just to keep taxing and spending. The work is to modernise and make our economy and our public services more effective.
So you must be disappointed then that it's going to rise steadily over the next 5 years.
Well, look, the Chancellor had a choice coming into office, right? We had public finances in a mess, and you had to find tens of billions of pounds. So you had to choose. You could either cut public services by tens of billions of pounds when they'd been cut so much under the Conservatives, or you had to go to tax whilst honouring your promises in the manifesto to working people, or you had to do what the Conservatives did, which was just keep borrowing every month to pay the day-to-day bills. That is not a sustainable path for the country's debt. It's not a sustainable path for public finances. So the choices we've made, whilst I recognise are difficult for some people who were asking to pay more, does mean that those fiscal rules are met early. It does mean that you've got a grip of public finances. It does mean you're paying for public services with tax receipts, not with monthly borrowing.
Clearly, borrowing is going up, though, either way. Just wanted to get into one of the specifics of the budget, and the NIC increase for employers. Obviously, you've increased it. The rate goes up to 15%. But you also lowered the threshold at where it kicks in. It comes down from about £9,000 to £5,000. It does, therefore, disproportionately hit the employers of lower income workers. Talk me through how you decided that was the right way to put up NIC.
Well, the first question was, are we honouring our manifesto commitments? That's why we ended up with employer national insurance contributions and not those that employees...
Which everyone has acknowledged does still hit employees down the line. So let's not go down that argument again. But talk me through why you decided to disproportionately hit lower income workers.
If I might just say, it's important that we made that promise to working people, and we've honoured that.
I didn't want to go into this again, but
it's up to you. But I mean,
but you brought it up again. Yesterday, the Chancellor said wage increases might be slightly less than they otherwise would have been. De facto, that is clearly a hit on working people. Paul Johnson of the IFS said the continued pretence that these changes will not affect working people risks further undermining trust.
I'm not giving any pretense about anything. All I'm telling you is that the Treasury, which sets tax rates, is not increasing the rate of tax on working people. That was the promise we've made.
Does it hit working people?
That we've delivered. We completely respect the OBR's assessment.
Does it hit working people?
So we recognise that the OBR has predicted that in future...
Does it hit working people?
I'm answering your question. The OBR has predicted that in future years, wage growth may become lower as a consequence of employers having to pay more.
So it hits working people.
Employer national insurance. Yes, but the question in the manifesto...
Yes, it does. So again, I come back to this point. If you were trying to avoid that, are you not continuing to undermine trust in politics?
No, because the promise in the manifesto was not to increase the rate of tax that employees pay on their pay slip.
That was not the promise in the manifesto.
Yes,
that's what you're now making the promise. No. We've all read the manifesto. The words...
Should we get it up on the screen? Have you got it? It says that we make a promise to working people, that's people who go to work and get a pay slip, that we will not increase income tax or national insurance. That's a promise that we've honoured.
Not pay slips. It did specifically say you won't increase national insurance.
How do you get paid?
Hold on. You have just said The phrase in the manifesto was working people. You have just acknowledged to me, yes, it hits working people. You're then adding this caveat of, did pay slips get mentioned in the manifesto?
You should get the manifesto up. I'm happy to go through it.
You've just quoted it to me. You have just quoted it to me.
And
you've said working people. Separately, 10 seconds ago, you said, yes, it hits working people.
We've honoured the commitment not to increase the tax rate on working people. If we'd have broken that promise, what would it have looked like? It would have looked like the Chancellor increasing
Did the manifesto say we will
contributions.
not put up the tax rate on working people?
It said we will not increase the tax on national insurance or income tax on working people.
No, it didn't. It said we will not put up the national insurance contribution. Working people was in the comment before that. You just quoted that to me.
Look, we can have a debate about the plain English assessment of our manifesto. I helped write the thing. I'm telling you the meaning behind the words. I'm telling you the explanation of the plain English way in which it's been drafted. And we can have a debate about how you've interpreted it, but I can tell you as one of the authors of the manifesto that the commitment was not to increase the tax rate on working people. That is a promise that by fact we have honoured at this budget.
I mean, again, I didn't even want to go down this route, so you brought this up. You have acknowledged in this interview that this budget does hit working people.
And do you acknowledge that we've not changed the tax rate that employees pay on national insurance? Yes or no?
I do. But
exactly. But there we go.
But
we've honoured our manifesto commitment.
Hold on. You just, again, specified tax rate.
Yeah.
Does it say that in the manifesto?
It says that we will not increase the tax that employees pay for working.
Is that the wording? Did you specify tax rate in the manifesto?
I'm telling you, as someone that authored the manifesto,
that's not the words you use, and that's the question you just asked
me on this. It's the words that we use, and that's what we meant, and that's what we've delivered.
Well, I mean, listen.
You can disagree. We're going to have to disagree, but I'm just telling you what the manifesto says.
People will be the judges. The final question I've got going forward is so much looking backwards. So much looking backwards. You've passed a massive budget. You've put in play now all of the things that you hope will deliver for the country going forward, and we all hope you're right. From now on, do you take responsibility for what happens to the economy?
Absolutely. And we take responsibility for this budget because we were elected on a mandate of change. And we could have carried on doing what the last government did, but it wasn't working. So we've taken a different decision, which was to invest in our country, to get a grip of public finances so the NHS can get back on its feet, and to protect working people in the budget. We are absolutely clear that we've honoured those commitments. Those are the choices this government has made. And it's now our job, having started this budget process, to get on and deliver the change we've promised.
Darren Jones, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.